What's up, folks? Guy McPherson here, founder of the Trauma Therapist Project, host of the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and membership community Trauma Therapist 2.0. Yesterday, I was doing an interview and was interviewing this woman. She was so inspiring. I mean, I guess one of the reasons why I keep doing these podcasts is because it is just amazingly inspiring for me, getting to meet people. And what I wanted to talk about today was the role of the excuse me, the trauma healer within the process of therapy or coaching even. I mean, so many people now are doing coaching, and I think my role, the way I see it, is being able to get in there and stir up the guts, in a sense, of someone, and kind of find authenticity, discover authenticity and presence. I think so much of what measures a person's happiness or success, quote unquote, or effectiveness in doing this work is their ability to be comfortable in who they are. And I know for myself, when I was in graduate school, so much of what I thought was important was, just getting all of this kind of what I call external knowledge. What book did I need to read to become a new trauma therapist or healer? What workshop did I need to go to? What article did I need to read? And yes, those things are crucial, right? They're so important, understanding how trauma impacts the brain and the body. But so much of this work of sitting with someone who's been impacted by trauma depends upon the healer, quote unquote, the therapist, the coach, and their ability to be comfortable in who they are, to own their story, to have discovered or explored or worked on their own traumas, their own struggles, their own challenges, and also their own successes, their own wins. And I think all of those things, in part, really go a long way to allowing someone to sit authentically with someone else. And when I say that, I don't mean wantonly or unethically self-disclosing, without boundaries, by any stretch of the imagination. What I do mean is I think it's very different for someone to work with someone, as a trauma therapist or a counselor or a social worker, whatever, to sit with someone who's been impacted by trauma and to just go in with a bunch of interventions, a lot of knowledge maybe about trauma and how to implement certain things. That's one way. It's very different than having the strength, the knowledge in yourself, about yourself. I often talk about the model of the therapeutic relationship or the coaching relationship as this a glass sphere or this hunk of clay. I think a lot of individuals, and I know myself when I was seeing clients, imagined the therapeutic relationship as this glass ball, this fragile crystal glass ball that you had to carry around like this for fear that it was going to crack or smash. With every step you take or every trip, it was going to fall and just splatter. As opposed to this hunk of clay, right? That with every step gets a little nicked or marred, and that's fine. And there's self-trust there in that therapeutic relationship. There is belief. There's hope. And those things, those qualities, those elements, they don't just appear within the therapeutic relationship or the therapeutic alliance. Those things have to be cultivated. And I, after doing over 290 interviews on the Trauma Therapist Podcast now with, a lot of the thought leaders in the field and lesser known individuals in the field, but no less amazing and inspiring guests, what's come to my attention, one of the themes that keeps coming up, and if you're watching this, just jot down where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. One of the themes that keeps coming up is there's inevitably been a misstep or an error in that therapeutic relationship because of the clinician. What's up, Nicola? The clinician really not allowing themselves to be authentic, or not trusting themselves, or not believing in themselves, not feeling that they're enough, right? Always feeling that, well, I'm going to screw something up, I'm going to re-traumatize someone, or I don't know enough. What am I? All these. What am I? I don't know what I'm doing. And to a certain degree, a lot of that could be valid. But what I'm talking about here is, and I think this topic really needs to be attended to in the education of someone who's just getting into the field of trauma or becoming trauma informed, and that is not only just working on yourself, doing therapy, but owning your story, owning your experiences and how they've made you who you are. And I can talk about my own experience, and I think for a long time, as someone who was bullied when I was younger, and really realizing how that impacted my self-esteem and the trajectory of certain relationships I'd been in. And then you go into therapy and you think you work, or I thought I worked on this to a certain degree, but then getting into specific positions and seeing clients and realizing that I found myself relying on books and studying interventions and trying to fit square pegs into a round hole. Okay, Mr. So-and-so is having this experience. Oh, I think page 242 of Pat Ogden's book or Bessel van der Kolk's book, there's an intervention on there that I know is just going to work. And of course it doesn't work like that. But what happens is, if you as a trauma worker, a trauma healer, a clinician of any kind, and you start to own your story, you start to invest and realize the importance of yourself within that therapeutic relationship, it invites a certain degree of it's hard, it's challenging. I mean, it demands that you look at yourself, right? It demands that you be willing to a certain degree to sit in silence and not rush to fix, to cure, to help. That's another thing I wanted to talk about here is I think a lot of people, well, granted, a lot of people get into this field of helping, whether you're a clinician of any social worker, a counselor, whatever, you want to quote unquote help. But I think a lot of us, and again, I'll speak for myself, you don't really think about, well, what exactly does help mean? What exactly does fix mean? What exactly does cure mean? And as my guests have shared on the podcast, the job really, Tama Bryant Davis says the first job is to give hope, to provide hope. And I think when I was just starting out in graduate school, I was, what do you mean? That's it? What do you mean just witness? That's it? That's all I have to do? What do you mean just sit there and be present? That's all I have to do? Well, it turns out that those little easy things, seemingly easy things, are pretty difficult to do because it requires this is where the art of this work comes in. And I think what I'm trying to do is champion the individual clinician, champion the self-trust, and champion inspiration and creativity and a willingness to make a mistake. I think when we as people encounter someone who's willing to make a mistake in our presence, willing to own that, there's a certain humanity that comes up in us, right? There's a certain amount of willingness to forgive that comes up. And when you're not willing to go there, a wall, I think, comes up. I don't know, is this making sense to people? So what I'm trying to do with my work is to really champion and renew the focus on the clinician. And what does that mean? That means not just talking about self-care or self-nourishment, but to practice that. I remember one of the first interviews I did, I think was with Linda Kern, and it might have even actually been the first interview I did. And I remember I was asking about self-care, what did she do to practice self-care? And she listed off, it was like, literally, I think like 10 things she did. What's up, Angela? Just listing 10 things that she did for self-care. And I was like, oh my God, I'm certainly not doing all of those things. But I think the important thing here is to realize that it's going to be different for each person, but to have something, I think oftentimes in this field, people talk about self-care, and it's one of those words that just easily, floats off the tongue. Similarly, authenticity. But what does that mean? And I had for a time, I thought that authenticity was this distant point that each of us, each clinician, I'm not seeing clients now, but each client, each therapist rather, went to. But there's not just one singular authenticity point. It's going to be different for each person, right? It's going to be different for you. It's going to be different for another clinician. But what does that look like, number one? And number two, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis to cultivate that? So what I'm talking about here, a lot of this is day-to-day cultivation of authenticity, day-to-day cultivation of presence, and upholding a certain personal truth in different relationships. I put together an online course about this for inner work for the new trauma worker and how to cultivate authenticity. And I did an interview for this course with Marshall Lyles, and the interview was amazing. I mean, he was amazing, not for me, but he was amazing. And one of the things he talked about when I asked him about, presence and authenticity, how do you develop that? How do you cultivate that? And he said, well, really it comes down to practicing in each of my other relationships, right? In each of my personal relationships, and using that in a sense as a model for my being able to be authentic in a therapeutic relationship. All right. Whew. So, this stuff gets me going, and I think in truth, it's one of the things that I have been working on for a long time. Where's my truth? Where is my authenticity? And creating a program, creating a platform to help educate new trauma workers, new trauma healers, creating a program, a membership to help inspire and support new trauma workers and new trauma healers is something that, to a certain degree, comes easy for me, but it's certainly not without its challenges. And I have to weigh that, having gone to graduate school, getting a PhD in clinical psychology, but now not seeing clients, but really, on the other end, working full-time in Trauma Therapist 2.0, Trauma Therapist podcast, what I'm doing, and making amends with that, finding my center. So I think that, in another way, what I'm saying here is clinicians who are just starting out on their trauma-informed journey, which are the kind of people that I speak to and work for, try to support, I think could go a long way in understanding that it's not just, reading amazing books like Bruce Perry's book. I mean, I always talk about this book. I have this book handy right here. It's not just that, but it's turning the mirror on yourself and being able to be comfortable in who you are. And again, that means not just being willing to open the door and share the amazing experiences of your life. And it doesn't also mean being willing and necessarily sharing the awful times in your life, but it means being willing to engage in a communication in that therapeutic alliance in an honest, open way, with respect, with boundaries, and with ethics, of course, should those moments arise. And I think that's the difference between a skilled, authentic clinician and one who might be perhaps extremely knowledgeable, but hasn't yet been willing to explore themselves and understanding the importance in that work. So anyway, that's what I'm saying. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Just jot down in the box there where you're watching from and what you do. Love to see what you guys are doing. All right, man. I will talk to you later. Take care.